Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming to the final session of the Open Athens conference. It's going to be a round table discussion with a great panel led by Sam Herbert from 67 Clicks. Every single digital transaction leaves data behind it, and the panel will be discussing what's the value of that data and how do we curate it. And I'd just like to say thank you to our sponsors, EBSCO. And on that note, I'll pass over to Sam.
Great, thank you. Thanks, John. So, welcome to a conversation about the importance of data. My name is Sam Herbert. I am one of the co-founders of 67 Bricks. 1.7 megabytes of data was created every second for every person in the world during 2020. That is about 2.5 quintillion bytes of data every day created by humans. Apparently a quintillion has 18 zeros. The amount of data being created is approximately doubling every year. The use of data is driving change across our world. Whole industries have been radically reinvented around the use of data. Insurance, retail, travel, construction, investment, medicine, gambling, the list goes on. But I heard a story recently about how investment companies are using satellite imagery to inform investment decisions. They are automatically analyzing satellite images, turning them into data to identify the location of cranes on building sites. Apparently, this is a good early indicator of growth in a local economy. The new game in the investment industry is trying to find the new data-derived insight that gives you an investment edge. So, the importance of data in the modern world is really not in question. This conversation today brings together an expert panel to consider what is the importance of data to the world of scholarly communications. How are we doing and what can we do better? With me today, we have the publishing data expert, Lettie Conrad, affiliate senior associate, product research and development, Maverick Publishing, the technology data expert, Scott Williams, VP of Platforms and Technology in Gruyter, and the library data expert, Samantha Heeson, Electronic and Data Services Librarian, Leeds Beckett University. Great job title, by the way. So let's start by asking the question, how do you leverage data? What are the opportunities and what are the risks? Lettie, would you like to kick us off?
I'd love to. Thank you. I'm so pleased to join an esteemed group to chat about this topic. One of my first questions as we were looking at this topic together was to just make sure we're all clear as to what data we're referring to. There's so much data surrounding our lives personally and organizationally. But the data that I want to be sure we focus on today, that I really think has been featured throughout this conference, is that which speaks to human practice of research and learning. The people at the heart of what we do deserve, as someone said earlier, better than the sort of raw end of the supply chain deal. They deserve better than a generic experience. And it's really time for publishers to sort of, join best practices around using data in a way that will speak to those human practices. In particular, I'm a fan of things like leveraging data to enrich user personas. We saw Jazz earlier talk about the personas that are used at Open Athens, and it was just very heartwarming to hear about those really rigorous, important practices in place. But there are some really interesting new approaches to persona analytics and actually automating some of the data points that will speak to those human interactions that we care most about. And when I say we, I mean each of us individually, regionally or organizationally, playing the role that we do. I think it's important to think about that human aspect, or the human heartbeat in our data, that it's not just sort of anecdotal data or the data that we prepare to present to the board, but the kind of data that we can all be using every day in the work we do that will better derive insights about who our users are and what we can do to better serve their journey. So when I think about this question, I think about identity management and identity strategies, persona analytics, as I said, but really whatever the approach, as Chris Thompson mentioned earlier, considering the human scale of those metrics and being sure that they are human-centric applications of data. Those were my first impressions.
Great, thank you so much. Scott, and would you like to, what's your view on kind of why is this an important subject, and how do you go about leveraging data?
Well, I think your first point about the scale of data generally, which manifests from identity management, platform usage, data within content, predictive analytics. It's such a vast field. I think I'm a relative newcomer to this whole industry, and so I come with a slightly different view of data and why I think it's kind of essential for the industry to kind of understand not only what do we mean by data, but also what do you do with it, and also how do you store it? Because I think the whole industry seems to be running off spreadsheets as far as I can tell. And that is not data, that is headache, and that is a missed opportunity. So one of the things that we're doing here at Gruyter is bringing in people from other industries who have already built things that we need. So, we're building a data lake and we're building a minimal viable product with that within 6 months. We didn't really ask permission, we just did it. So I think not only is it about kind of the value and how you use it, but also having honest conversations in your organization, because there'll probably be someone in every single organization who does want a data lake or automation or a way of transponding kind of data from one point to another and creating automation. But as I think the elephant in the room is your organization honest enough about what it's doing at the moment, and does it have the capabilities to actually take it from a bunch of spreadsheets and a bunch of ideas into something which you can query, build, and actually, find something out that you didn't know, which is basically what data is actually about. It may create another question, it may create another meeting, but it should create a sense of confusion, not just kind of, you put something together and you get a result. That's rarely what data does. Data creates another set of questions and queries and changes your mind state about what you're doing. And I think that's another part of this, which is where I come from, as well as governance and structure and all those things, if that makes sense.
That does, that's great. Thanks, Scott. Samantha, where do you go from there? If we had to have a conversation about honesty of kind of capabilities around data in the industry, would you have any thoughts on that, or how would you follow that?
Scott's just said, in that there is lots of data and it has so much potential, but we're not quite there yet. We really are at the beginning stages, and we want to do it. It's having the knowledge and the experience and the systems to enable us to do that, and we're just dipping our toes in the water at the moment in the main.
Great. Do you have a story to tell about how data is being used, or and what it brought about in your workplace?
Yes. So I work in a university library. I'm at Leeds Beckett University, and ultimately everything that we're doing with data there is in order to provide the best experience we can for our students. I specifically work in learning resources, and so I have access to usage data for how students using electronic resources as well as the physical learning resources, and that comes out of our library management system and also various user authentication systems such as Open Athens, and then we also have student data in the student record, and they have to be tied together, which we do via student IDs, user IDs, which occur in both. And then that enables us to analyse student engagement with those learning resources. So, for instance, in the past, a piece of analysis that I've done has been for one of the schools. We have 13 schools, and they had certain perceptions about how students were engaging with resources, and they wanted to see whether that was backed up or not by any evidence. So we did that analysis, and it showed that you've got your first year undergraduates who are not quite used to self-directed learning yet and are using lots of resources, but maybe not quite so focused and not going so in depth with them based on their choices. Second years were coasting along a little bit, and that's where there were some concerns. And then the third years were really stepping it up at exam time and focusing their research around their dissertations. And that was the same for postgraduates as well. And this is what academics had thought was happening, but they needed the evidence to back that up, and that enabled them to respond accordingly then, where they needed to focus additional guidance.
I love that story, Samantha, if I may just jump in. It reminds me of something I sort of hinted at brief talk yesterday, which is really pairing the qualitative and the quantitative data, especially when we're talking about understanding what's going on with human practice, right, and human interaction. So we can use, big data sets, as you've done in that example, to validate what we're seeing, kind of at the field level, and vice versa. Sometimes we need to go out to the field to understand what we're seeing in the data. So I just think that's a great example.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because sometimes data is relied on too much. There could be a range of data available, but also experts have their own insights, and that's where academic support and the academics came in. And even though in that instance it corroborated what they thought, we have had instances where it might have challenged that, and those other experts still need to step in and say, hang on a minute, we need, as Scott was saying, we need to do these raised questions, we need to do some more investigation, whether that's more data analysis or user focus groups and so on, to try and find out what's really happening.
Oh, Scott, are you talking? You're on mute. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that in my experience of building digital businesses, experiences, whatever, is that data governance and making sure that you're collecting all the right things from your platform in the right way to enable you to find out what's going on is one thing. And the second thing you have to do is get closer to your audience. And that doesn't necessarily mean asking them what they want, because basically if you ask people what they want, they'll tell you and then walk out the room and do the exact opposite. I mean, I've got loads of stories around this. It's hilarious. People just lie to themselves. So especially around UX and product design, we've been having chats today about how we're collecting data, and then we need to find the tension between the behaviors and attitudes and the emotional states, and how do you map those two things? And the only thing that comes out of it is probably more work. So it's an ongoing piece of work of trying to work out the emotional state. The other thing, which I was talking to someone earlier, and they said a very, very wise thing, that they said, if you manage data badly, it never appears in your accounts. So the impact of bad data governance and structuring and all those things never gets mentioned in, accounting or bookkeeping, but the impact is riddled throughout all of your numbers. So if you don't look after your data properly, profits will incrementally kind of get slightly worse, or you'll have costs in a certain area, and it's hard to diagnose those things, but I can guarantee you that a big part of it will be kind of data transfer and the cleanliness of that data moving between departments. And it's the devil. It's just, doing data work properly is really, really hard, and also really boring. I mean, it is. It's boring. It's really boring. Like you spend hours and hours and hours. Now we're building a data lake at the moment. And everyone's like, "Where's my thing?" And we're like, "You need to calm down a bit. It's going to take a while." We have terabytes and terabytes of data to pull through. So I think, the human element and the processing and the technology, they have to come together, because otherwise you get half a story, and you usually get the wrong story too, and then you build something and it sucks and everyone's angry.
Thank you. So I was you told a bit of a story about a use of data, and I was wondering, just to finish us off on this subject, Scott or Lettie, do you have a story to tell about a positive story about how data has been used either more recently or in the past to talk about how you leverage data and what?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can tell you a Google story, which is quite fun.
Go on then.
So Google bought YouTube back in 2008, and I was tasked with putting together, you know, those annoying little ads. Yeah, me and some friends developed those. I don't think they're around anymore, but basically we basically watched to see what people were doing. Weirdly, on YouTube, people were looking at the videos, so we had to put some ads in the in the video, and I think at least the first 3 or 4 versions of that ad were just really badly received, like no response rate, everyone just closing it. And then basically we made it translucent and it moved, and it was that was 13 years ago, it's a long time ago. But basically what we found out was that how you actually designed this thing to begin with and what it did enabled you to have a slightly higher level of engagement. And from that basically was born a bunch of videos now that stop you watching cats on skateboards and swearing parrots and whatnot. But yeah, I think that was on a slightly kind of larger scale where we were just using pure numbers because, you know, it was a commercial imperative. But I guess the point is that moving quickly with a hypothesis, changing it, not asking permission. We didn't go to any bosses. We knew what the metric was, and we did it, and we found a place where that works, and then I handed it off, and one could argue that I kind of ruined YouTube a little bit. in retrospect, yeah, but that was a long time ago. But yeah,
highlighted this presentation. We hear how YouTube is ruined.
yeah, thanks.
Lettie, any thoughts?
Yeah.
Any final thoughts from you on that?
Yeah, I would just throw out a couple of examples that I've been excited about, sort of back home in our industry. I like the use of analytics, for instance, to understand our organizational DEI components. Umbrella analytics is one that comes to mind. There's a handful out there that provide an organization a neutral view into inclusivity issues, equity and fairness issues, whatever those metrics may be, whether it be pay or hiring practices, but also specifically to building trust and engagement with the research community. The use of data at places like Repeta, or Obsidia. I saw a demo of that at NISO Plus 21 recently, basically using AI and data to help us catch cases of misinformation or disinformation, or as the Scholarly Kitchen talked about today, imposters or authors that have ill intent. So it's a matter, I think, of putting data to work where it can do its job, in part to allow humans to focus on the pieces that the computers can't do, that programmatic approaches can't solve. But yeah, I think there's a lot of good examples out there.
Thank you. That's great. So yeah, we've talked a little bit about how to leverage data, what the opportunities are. And for me, one thing that's interesting, I think, is that how you come at data, or your experience of data, forms your view of what it can do. But actually, there's a broad range of things we need to understand it does. Like, it supports better decision making. You can build better products. You can actually use it to drive products. You can create new and better user experiences, engage with user communities. There's a range of things and opportunities. So we've talked a bit about the opportunities. Scott, would you start us off to talk a little bit about the actual practicalities, the challenge of storing, collecting, and using data to deliver these new opportunities?
Yeah. I mean, I can talk about De Gruyter specifically because we're kind of in the process of, fundamentally changing parts of the business, and it's difficult. So if you look at data, we've been working with 6-7 Bricks, which is how Sam and I know each other. The intention is to turn most of the interactions and most of the content into data itself, right, on the platform. And then, which has taken about 18 months, and it's still not finished. And then underneath we're building a data lake. So the way to look at it is kind of there's a principle called your data model, right? So what is within certain departments, if it's a journal, then you need to know author name, publication name, DOI. If it's a book, it has a slightly different data model. For usage data, uniques, bounce rates, and each one of those is kind of a cluster of data which sits in this lake. So challenges, especially when you have legacy software and legacy behavior and a lack of understanding, is you need to have a lot of discipline around what those models are. So what are the things that are being inputted into your systems that you can then collect, clean, store, and then run queries against other parts of the data, other parts of the data model. Now, everyone I've hired to support this is there to augment the work we already do within Gruyter. And so there are people here who absolutely understand data in terms of reporting, but do they understand large-scale kind of data management, automation, data modeling, cleaning that data, looking after it, saying no a lot, which is basically kind of a precursor to doing any work. It's kind of 90% no, 10% maybe, So data management is an art, absolutely. And making sure the software and the governance and the people, you have the right skills, the right processes, and the right protection around it to get it ready is, for me, from what I've seen, I've only been working in this industry for two years and 18 months of that. We've just been rebuilding everything, so I know very little. But from my observations, the industry needs to understand that most of the things that this industry needs already exist. We just have to maybe bring other people in who have done it to help us get to a place to understand it, rather than saying data a lot and putting it in PowerPoint and then not actually doing it. There are people out there you can plug into, and you just have to start, and you probably will have to get it wrong quite a bit. But I think the governance, the ownership, data is a product. So you need product owners and you need disciplines around it to make it happen. So that's my kind of slightly opinionated take on it.
Lettie or Samantha, do you want to follow that in terms of the conversation around thoughts around what do we need to do around storing, collecting and managing and using data, the practical details, the practical challenges?
Go ahead, Samantha.
Yeah.
So the data that I'm able to use is collected and stored in a range of what I would call enterprise level systems, but then I have to download it to a local PC and deal with it in Access and Excel, which is not great. It's a perfect example of what Scott was talking about. It's a nightmare. And the data is changing from day to day. It's live data. Students are using the library all the time, whether that's remotely and online, or when we're on campus, going in there and physically taking books out. It's also really messy, is the data. And again, that's just my opinion. But for me, it's because it's come from all those different systems. I don't have a consistent unique identifier or a consistent data structure or consistent delimiters. Every supplier, every system has its own. And even though they might have the same data in them, it's just formatted so differently that I spend hours tidying data up before I can actually do any analysis, and people want it now. It's like, yeah, but I've got 2 weeks of data tidying to do first, and then I can start the analysis. So it would be great. I mean, there's several elements to it. One, if I had better software, that would help a lot. I could do some of that data tidying, but it would also help if those suppliers and system developers use even though we have standards, that they were more consistent with standards across the sector, but then also at the data entry level when people enter the data, it's that really good quality checking that you need, and again, real standards. Not, there are such a selection of standards, and so one person prefers this and another person prefers that. That means I could have a comma in one system and a semicolon in another. That doesn't help me. Or I could have a full stop on the end of a title, or a slash on the end of a title, or a space. So,
that's
frustrating.
that is, yeah.
Scott, I love the idea of data as a product. And I'm starting to see in publishing houses, I'm starting to see publishers put data product owners in place. Emerald comes to mind.
Yeah.
They have a really robust identity strategy, and it's a real mindset shift for them organizationally.
Yeah.
And I think that's necessary. You know, I talk to publishers and tech providers all the time who are interested in leveraging data, who are interested in making, you know, that move and advancing, you know, their practices. But you can't go from not doing anything with data to having, say, an AI.
No.
We often talk about you need IA before AI, right? You need information architecture, and that's often UX driven. Once you have that structure, then we can start making magic with data.
I mean, when I first came to Gruyter, there was a lot of kind of chat around AI, and you know, if your data is not clean, structured, forget it. Like, you're not doing any AI. So, you know, we're nowhere near it. You know, as an organization, we don't need to be. We don't deserve to be. There's some basic, to your point, you know, data goes through the entire organization. So what you type into your editorial system or your ERP system will appear on the website and in Crossref and PubMed. And if that's not looked after, then what happens is the people, invariably we find is that the people typing in that information incorrectly are the first ones to tell me that something's not working. And it's like, well, what are you doing to make sure that? So I think there's some basic awareness of like the things that you do have an impact on search. So everyone across the organization has some form of ownership around data. And if they're not aligned and not aware of the impacts of the stuff that they do, then being able to kind of put knowledge graph through a bunch of content and work out, you know, how you can build a system that answers questions based on knowledge and all your content, it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So, you know, I've been lucky to work in places where, you know, startups, big digital businesses, data is the oil. You know, it's the most valuable thing. And everything that they do is about extracting more value out of systems, content, users, to find out more, to plan more, to do more.
And they're investing in it. You know, they're investing in data literacy in their staff. They're not expecting you to operate with spreadsheets, right? I mean, that's part of it. Yeah.
No, exactly that. So, you know, we don't have any spreadsheets in our team. I refuse to use them. You know what I mean? Like I want to see either the raw code or we're using Looker, which is a Google tool, which will visualize stuff. It's browser based, and we've started to show people internally some mock-ups, and people are like, "Oh wow!" Like we have a map that basically has all the sales revenue for each region, which you could just go into and kind of go, you know, how much is the US making at the moment? And this is the date, and you would click on the map, and it would just say this number, and you could drill down and then see what that number is made out of, which is great. And, you know, because the data model and the structure and the software and the governance, we've taken our time, and now what happens is, you know, these things aren't easy, but I made it easy by hiring people smarter than me, and then kind of going, just, you know what I mean? Like, just do the management wavy hand. Yeah. Like, is it done yet? Like the annoying boss thing. Like, is this done yet? That's my joke to them, and that, you know, I won't repeat their responses, but that's yeah. So I think, you know, everyone has a responsibility to make data better in the business, and everyone in publishing has a role to play in it. But I'm not entirely sure how many people within organizations like ours and others are aware of, you know, you type something in incorrectly, then the search won't work as well.
I think it's a really interesting point that you're all talking about there, which is the kind of the challenge for an organization, and how does an organization move in that direction? It's not, as you said, it's not just about, okay, we're going to do something with data and we're going to start with AI. There's a whole set of kind of capabilities and competencies that allow you to become more data driven, or whatever the right word is there. Samantha might even say it's not even just your organization, it's the whole industry that has to support you to be able to do more data work. And I mean, how do we then start? If we understand that it's a long journey and it's about kind of organizational change and organizational competency, where do we start? And what are the ways, the quick ways, or the initial things we should do on that journey?
I mean, start is what I would do. I mean, don't do PowerPoint. Don't have many meetings. Find someone who can help you build a prototype, invest a little bit, understand it, and then iterate and do more of it or less of it, depending on the outcome. I think, like I said, there are people out there who can help. And there are people that you can hire or consult with. And I think empowering them and giving them the brief and then letting them get on with it. And then, you know, I haven't been to many events. Like I said, I'm relatively new here, but there seems to be a lot of talk around data and not a lot of actual people doing stuff. And my background is, if you talk about it and you're not doing it, you better shut up. It's like I would be destroyed in the businesses that I've worked in previously. I did that. So I think take the plunge, learn, get yourself uncomfortable, and see what happens. You'll be surprised what happens when you kind of go out of the remit of what you've always worked on and try and do something else. It's not as bad, as scary as it might feel. That would be my advice. I mean, I'm pretty blunt with how I work anyway, so maybe a slightly more polite version of what I do.
Thank you. Samantha, were you going to add something to that? How did you start, or where would you start?
Yeah, I agree with Scott. In my experience, it's on a smaller scale because of where I'm working and what I'm working with. But I've been in my current role for 4 years, and I've slowly been working through different sets of data, different kinds of analyses, and along the way I'm gathering evidence as to say this is where we need to do some major foundational work to get this data in a really good way so that we can get the best out of it. So as I'm doing the analyses, I'm also producing another analysis and another set of evidence to say, well, here's your analysis, however, I'm going to caveat it massively with A, B, C, D, and here is A, B, C, D to prove why that is an issue. And that has been taken on board, and we are now starting to consider how we can deal with that, because we do want to use our data as well as we possibly can. But it is a slow chipping away process.
Yeah, definitely.
I would just give a shout out to the standards, data standards, information standards, web standards, really software standards, everything in between. But in particular, when we're talking about data that flows through the supply chain across each of the, kind of sectors that the three of us are representing, we make Samantha's life easier as publishers if we're caring for metadata practices upstream. Those sorts of issues, I think, are where, Sam asked a question as we were preparing for this that's sort of been rolling through my head, which is we sort of represent all of the key players that can make a difference for data and scholarly communications. And where do we start? Where would we break down, if we weren't able to achieve what we're envisioning? And I would say it's partly that cross-sector collaboration, where data standards in particular are critical. It's where we can agree to some basic, rules of engagement to really increase the accuracy and the applicability of the data in our industry.
Thank you. That's great. So we've talked about the opportunities. We've talked a bit about the challenges, the practicalities. The last kind of section I wanted to ask around was kind of who owns publishing and library data, and who sets the rules around how it is used. So Samantha, would you like to kick us off on that kind of broad subject?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with a statement I think I mentioned earlier on. It's that at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is improve or enhance the student experience and the library's offering as part of that. So that's why we hold and analyse data. But at the end of the day, that data belongs to the student in terms of their usage, and they can actually request for it not to be used. Thank goodness we've not had one of those cases, and to some extent data protection law would enable us to deny that request because it's part of our business need to enable that service delivery and that provision of a good education. And I imagine we would try to convince any individual of that. However, we do also have student contracts and student privacy policies that also set that all out when a student registers and enrolls with us for their course of education, to say, this is the data you're giving to us, that's why you're giving it to, this is why you're giving to us, and this is what we're going to do with it. But we also have a responsibility to look after that data and protect it as a data controller and as data processors, along with our suppliers and system developers as well. And in return, we also have to respect those contracts. For example, you might get some examples of what appears to be unfair usage. So we'll sometimes get requests from suppliers saying, can you just look into this, please? And we're obliged to do that as part of our contract with them. Somebody could be doing something that they really ought not to be. But again, the privacy policy and contracts do cover that again, to say we are allowed to do this, but I know some people have great concerns about that. But it is, I think there are lots. We have a data governance team. We do data audits every year to say this is the data hold, this is what we're doing with it, this is why. So we do have to answer not only to the law, but also to our internal authorities as well.
And that's partly, Samantha, because your institution has made sort of a pact with students, right? And that value exchange is upfront. And I think that's what I would encourage publishers to do as well. As far as data ownership, I mean, there's lots of different ways to approach that question, but I think at the heart of it, users are willing to engage in that type of value exchange when there is real value to be had in, say, a registered account or whatever sort of point of engagement with a publisher or with another organization. If we're not offering that value, then we cannot be blamed, for not having that direct relationship with users. So I think that the ownership piece partly is down to stewarding that relationship directly with the users in our communities. Oh, Scott, I think you're muted.
Not anymore. I hope. No, I think there's also, I totally agree. I think product strategy and data strategy are the same thing. So you have to build stuff and it has to have value, and you have to understand your audience to then be able to kind of extract data to do X, Y, and Z. So I think products and data are the same thing. You do one thing and then you get another thing that comes out the end. I think the other thing is that there's a beginning. I think there's a beginning of a sea change in terms of data ownership generally. I think blockchain is basically like mobile in the mid-noughties, right? Everyone talked about mobile and no one really did anything. Everyone, mobile. And then the iPhone came out and Android came out and now everyone's like, oh yeah, mobile. And I think decentralized data, so using blockchain technology in the future to basically enable people to use their data but own it themselves and decide how that's distributed and used is, I think it's inevitable. You obviously have the likes of Facebook and cookies, which is kind of a precursor to this. So Apple and Facebook I have friends working in both and they hate each other, frankly. But so I think there is this kind of groundswell of change, because I think actually, do I think over the years data has been abused by large organizations for profit and for everything else? Yes. I absolutely believe that. I think the future is you have to be way more transparent and empower the user and build things that actually add value to enable people to give the thing, to give you the name, any personal PII stuff. You have to be very clear about how you manage it, how you govern it, and what the value exchange is, and it has to be clear. And at the moment, Facebook knows more about you than MI5, and it knows, and you get no money, nothing back. You just either you either believe in QAnon or you're angry about absolutely things that don't matter. So there's a breakdown somewhere culturally with this stuff as well, I think. That's my data rant over. I've gone for weeks on that. But I think
that point about a value exchange is really important. We get asked that a lot as well. And our view is that if you're providing enough value, then and you're willing to and you can explain that exchange, then there's a good, and if there's a good reason for doing it, then that's what works. If you can say, the first time I ever saw a Google ad on a different website to something I'd been looking at somewhere else was completely shocking, and I was like, what? But that maybe wasn't a great value exchange. But when you start to be told, well, you're going to work today, and actually I'm telling you that your journey to work is going to be 15 minutes longer because you've got your major routes, there's traffic on them. That is hugely valuable and welcome. And actually, okay, yeah, I was willing to give you that. I was willing to give you that data to have that. A question being asked from the audience. So where do you go to learn about the policy, governance, and ethics involved in this kind of data usage?
Well, it depends on who you are and what you want to do, I guess. My advice would be, I think, first of all, that question, the subtext to that is like, we're not sure what to do, which I think is totally the right place to start. I don't think publishers do enough of, I don't know. I have no idea. That's complete. No, I think publishing pretends that it does. I don't know how to sell to a library. I don't know how to acquire an author. I have amazing colleagues here who do that. And so I think that's the first thing. Second thing is kind of go out and talk to people, educate yourself, find some experts, bring them in, get them to make you think differently and act and plan differently around this stuff. It's a bit of a fluffy answer because I think each case is very different, right? I think.
Yeah, it would be really different if we were talking about web analytics data, if we were talking about content metadata, so there's, it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. So for instance, improving a platform for content discovery or accessibility, there are SEO standards, there are indexing standards, in our industry, there are web accessibility standards, web content guidelines out there, right? So it really depends on what the question is. One of the places to start too would be regional legislation or regional policy that applies. So GDPR, for instance, or I'm in California, we have sort of our own data protection at a state level that went into place recently. So getting educated just regionally as to what would apply to your efforts is a good place to start. But then also getting specific about what you want to do. And being willing to be vulnerable, learning is not always easy, but definitely a good place to start.
Thank you. I've had another question from the audience. Do institutions like Leeds Beckett have a data strategy?
Good question.
At an institutional level, I would say no. There are pockets of strategy, and for the last year, we have had a more central data insights team with a new director for that, and so it's coming. Yeah, they've been working on that for the last year, and a lot of those people in that team have come from other teams around the university that have been fighting for this kind of thing for a long time. But yeah, we're still in the early stages of that overarching policy. But the data governance is in place, and local data strategies are there, but not that umbrella institutional one that would bring it all together. Not quite yet.
Lettie, do you see data strategy in place across publishing organizations?
I'm nodding vigorously because I can really relate. Most of the organizations that I've been working with, technology providers or content providers, is a very similar experience. There's pockets, right? So there might be a product team that's doing some really smart stuff with dashboards, in usage development, creating user journeys or persona analytics. There might be some really smart stuff going on in the sales group around, pricing or market uptake or conversion of that sort of thing. But yeah, I would say, Gruyter is a great example of a company that's really, taking a step back and saying, what do we, at a meta level want to achieve, and how does data help us do that? And then what changes do we need culturally to do that? And by culturally, I don't mean the soft, squishy stuff. Some of that, of course, is necessary. But culturally, as in, where do we prioritize our budget, right?
Yeah.
Where are we applying our effort? So yeah, I would say we're still, you know, as an industry, still struggling to get to a meta level, you know, sort of data strategy.
Yeah, we kind of have one. I mean, I was just saying, like, we have a vague direction of travel about how we collect, use it, how we share it. The other part, I think, is one of the things we're looking at now is also data enables automation between departments. So efficiencies too. So that's part of it too. So the whole ETL, you know, extracts, transform, and load data from one area to another is also part of the same thing, right? Because, you know, data can end in one department and it has to go to another and do a slightly different role. And so it never ends, basically, is what I'm saying. Like, you can build a data lake, and we're doing an MVP of that, and then there's another thing, and then there's another thing, there's another thing. So that meta view of structure and governance is vital for you to be able to let it, like, prioritization and spend, and spending money and then not getting any value for 6 to 8 months is a difficult thing for a publisher to swallow, but that's a fact. Value from technology comes in when you invest in the right thing, do the right thing, get the right people, have the right hypothesis. 18 months time, oh wow, it's really beginning to kind of kick in. And that's more of a longevity, long-term thing than just do data and it works. Like, that's like, by the way, if someone does pull that off, let me know, because I'd like to know what you did, because I think it's basically impossible. It's a really long-term investment, and you have to, it's difficult.
I'd love to see publishers get more patient with this stuff. I mean, we survive. We exist in an academic calendar in a lot of ways. Obviously, there's lots of different markets that many of us serve, but in lots of ways, we are hooked to that academic calendar, which means that things move at the pace it moves. So yeah, I would just underscore what Scott's saying there. Just be patient, be ready, you know, to make baby steps, you know, measure those, and then, you know, consider what that long view looks like, and not look for sort of quick expectations.
Yeah.
Thank you. One final question from the audience and from me. The question for the audience is, we keep being told that big data is our future, but listening to your interesting discussion around the varying quality and standard of data, what impact will this have on big data and how we can make it work for us? Now, that's a really interesting question, but also my question around related to that is, you know, and you touched on this earlier, we have the data, the technology data expert, we have the publishing data expert, and we have the library data expert here. We have all the ingredients for success. What may stop us leveraging data? What are the, from each of you? I'd be interested to hear as a thought.
I'll start. I think what Lettie said around patience. My observation is that basically academic publishers work off a 12-month schedule. So everything has to be done in 12 months, and then we do the next thing in 12 months. They do the next thing in 12 months, the next 12 months. I work on a 3-4 year cycle of value. So I have to convince people to trust me, which is difficult when you look like this. So I think that for me is about trust and capability and delivery. I just think the 12-month cycle thing kills this industry, because you can't solve anything in 12 months.
Cool. Thank you. Lettie, any final thoughts?
I would standards, and which also are not quick, but are critical if we are to sort of speak the same data language and really up our data literacy collectively. So I'm looking at you, NISO.
Great. Thank you. Samantha, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Lettie and Scott have said. It's, you know, it's patience, it's standards, it's looking at the long term. It's also committing the resource to it. It needs people and money behind it as well. And yeah, lots of places are struggling right now. And so yeah, there's one person in the team like me doing this kind of work. So.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. I think at this point I hand over to John to wrap us up. I think it's been a fantastic conversation, and I really enjoyed talking with the three of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Sam, I've just completely echoed what you just said. A really interesting and important debate. And I think as many people as possible should get involved in the discussions around the ethics, policy and governance of data, because it can such have an impact. But thank you to EBSCO as well, who supported that. And I'll see you all in the main room or the final session for a quick wrap up. Thank you.